think from a young age, there's this thought implanted in our heads that if things like this happen to us, it's somehow our fault. Even if it's not said to us directly, that thought is always somehow there. We constantly second guess ourselves and tell ourselves that surely I could have done something differently. Maybe if I said no one more time, maybe if I hadn't said something, they wouldn't be acting this way. They wouldn't have done that to me.
This was my first official boyfriend. We were actually in a relationship, which I couldn't believe. I didn't really know much about dating or like relationships in general or anything in like the sexual realm of relationships. I wasn't really like into stuff or knew much about it, so I went into this relationship pretty innocent, and I thought that this was going to be innocent and romantic and like warm feeling, but I honestly did not know that this was going to be something that traumatized me.
Growing up, I had an uncle who presented himself as someone wanting to mentor me. I was 16 at the time it had happened. In early November of 2017, I asked my uncle if he could teach me how to drive. We decided to go driving around my neighborhood and the neighboring streets, and all of it felt normal until he started to add more stops to our lessons. First, we stopped at a car wash, and the energy in the car started to turn sour as soon as he stopped at a motel. I assumed that he was on some kind of drugs or something, and he made me stay inside the car. Once we left the motel, I could tell that something was different.
This was a couple of years ago during high school. I was new to the whole dating thing, and I was confused about what it meant to date someone. I mean, I knew that they kissed and they went on dates and stuff like that, but being in high school, I didn't really know how a relationship would look for me. Around the same time, I was questioning things about myself. I didn't really feel sexual attraction towards people like other people said that they did. The whole concept was really confusing to me. For a long time, I thought that people made that up. I was really confused about what they meant when they said that stuff. I think, looking back in retrospect, that definitely played a role in what happened.
Starting off in the relationship, it was a bit iffy. He was already very controlling, which seemed kind of weird to me, but again, I didn't really know if that was right because I saw my mom being controlled or being controlling with my dad, and so I figured that was normal, and I was told that men were supposed to take control in their relationships and women were just supposed to be there, and men were supposed to just take charge. And besides, it started with small stuff. He would ask me to kiss him, and if I didn't, then he would guilt trip me. So I would give in and kiss him, and I could see now that he was trying to see how much control he had over me.
Once we stopped at a gas station, he started to make some really weird comments. Stuff about how he would go to hotels around the area and women would just approach him asking him for adult films. And it only got worse when he mentioned that she saw him undress and said that he was packing below the waist. We made one last stop before heading back to my neighborhood. He made me stop by my tia's, his sister's house, up the road. And I remember I was hungry, and so he offered me a leftover In-N-Out burger. After quickly eating it, we headed back. Before and after the stops we made, I drove around in my neighborhood, and we finally made it out in front of my house. We started chatting for a while.
I think I was the one who started it. Or, well, I didn't initiate sexual acts or anything, but I think I might have given him the impression that those things were okay. We were sitting together one day, and he had his hand on my thigh. It made my body feel weird, so I told him that. Again, this was my first relationship, and I didn't really know what was okay and what wasn't okay to say. I've always been kind of impulsive and socially unaware with certain things, so I thought it was normal to talk about that. I've never really been the type of person to hold back all the TMI things I usually say. That's kind of when things started. He would sit with me while I waited for my ride to come. It was soon after that we started kissing and making out while we waited, which I was okay with, but Then he transitioned to touching me down there. It was over my pants at first, and I tell him it was okay because I thought that's what people in a relationship were supposed to do. It was in all the movies I was seeing, but we were in public, and I was uncomfortable. I didn't really know how to tell him that I didn't want to, because it always seemed like he really wanted to. So I didn't want to make him upset by saying no. He'd talk about those types of things often. He'd show me pictures and posts on social media that referenced towards sexual things, and he'd say it was us, and maybe we could do those things. He started to ask if he could put his hand inside my pants, and again, I said yes. I was scared that he'd be upset with me or be like other people I've heard about and get aggressive or violent if I said no. I was afraid he'd yell or maybe even force it upon me. So I let him do what he wanted when he wanted. It eventually got to the point where he'd ask and put my hand in his pants. He'd have me touch him over his boxers. I remember I'd wonder what time it was or when I'd be able to go home. I honestly just wanted someone to come by so he'd stop.
He would put his phone on the ground when I would wear skirts, and he would record up my skirt, and he started asking for us to do much more things, and he wanted to get more physical, and or for me to touch him, and he kept asking, and no matter how many times I said no, I guess he finally got annoyed and took it upon himself. When I would invite him over, he would lock the door so I couldn't leave, and I felt trapped, and I couldn't call for help or anything because my parents didn't even know we were dating, and if I told them, honestly, I would have been blamed, so it didn't even feel like a safe space. And I tried to stop, of course, inviting him over, not wanting to deal with him, but he would show up and just ask my mom himself. So I had no choice, and I was scared if I broke up with him, he would tell everyone and twist what happened, and I would be seen as wanting to do all of that stuff when I didn't want to. Since he had a lot of friends and was popular, well, I wasn't. I was afraid they would believe him over me. During the sexual assault, he was very aggressive, and I would say I didn't want to, and I would end up with bruises after it was over because I said no. So I kind of just started to accept it, and I felt like I had to be okay with it, and I kind of just started telling myself, okay, this is what's normal now for me.
He sparked the conversation, which led to him asking if I could close my eyes for a second and to give him my hand. As a trusting niece, I did. In that moment, my eyes were closed, but I could tell that he had put my hand on his bare, erect penis, and I froze. I pulled my hand away as quickly as soon as I realized what had happened, and I told him I had to go. As I was grabbing my things, I remember him asking me, "You hate me now, don't you?" I just said goodnight to him and closed the car door in shock. I shocked myself out of the frozenness and headed straight to my room, and I cried. I really have no idea how many times I washed my hands to erase that memory and the foulness of what had happened to me. That Monday in November was the first extremely vivid memory of dissociation, and it followed me for the following weeks and months. I woke up the following day of the incident, and luckily I had a field trip to attend to with my best friend. I was so out of reality that entire day, and I could barely focus on the conversations and attractions of the field trips. With the amount of dread, flashbacks, complete disconnection to reality, and numbness I felt.
He'd grope my butt a lot, even if people were around. Once he even did it while we were talking to a teacher, but they didn't notice, and I tried not to react. I made a face at him because I didn't want him to do that, and it made me uncomfortable, but he just laughed about it. He told me he had dreams about me, about us, having sex together. I remember not knowing how to respond. On my birthday, he rubbed himself against me, right next to one of our friends. I was really uncomfortable then. We were in public with our friends and there was little kids around, but again, no one saw what happened and no one noticed. So it just kept happening. I remember one day we were sitting with our friends at lunch and he showed me an explicit picture of himself. It really caught me off guard because we were literally sitting right across from our friends. They were across the table from us and he was showing me a picture of himself. I didn't know how to react. How do you react to something like that? It kind of kept escalating further and further each time.
I would mention some things to people, but I guess it was never in enough detail to like raise any red flags to the people that I was telling this to. So it kept on going on and it didn't really stop until like even after we broke up. The breakup wasn't even on my terms. He broke up with me and expected me to come crying back to him, even though he broke up with me himself. He broke up with me himself, and it was his fault. He made it seem like it was mine, and he also called and texted me at like random times threatening to harm himself, which made me afraid and made me think it was all my fault when it wasn't. He put his hands on me in class and continued putting his hands on my thighs and even trying to go far by force. And he tried to force me to kiss him. He even stalked my house for the rest of the school year and into the next year as well. He didn't tell anyone how he assaulted me, but made everyone think that the breakup was my fault and on my terms when it wasn't, which caused me to face harsh words and receive dirty looks from people that I didn't even know.
After that interaction, I was heavily dissociated and depressed. I felt stripped of my innocence and robbed of the life I could have lived and the person I could have been. I was numb, experiencing flashbacks of his face at the moment of the sexual assault on replay in my head almost every day for months. I never felt the same after that. My body felt disconnected to my right hand, and I had to reassure myself that it was over. Physical contact from any man at the time felt so uncomfortable, unless it was my partner. Even just a pat on the shoulder made me want to sink into my own skin for a while. I felt so idiotic for trusting him so much, but then I realized that it wasn't my fault that a pedophile in my family decided to groom me.
He touched me multiple times a week, and he'd have me touch him at least once a week. But then, once we were in a room alone together, and it was dark, he was showing me something, but at some point the mood shifted, or rather, his mood shifted. He sat down and he exposed himself to me, fully, his bare penis out in the open. I didn't know what to do or what to say. He was touching himself and looking at me. He asked me to touch him. I felt like I couldn't speak. I was frozen. I didn't know what else to do, so I shook my head no. But he asked again, and I shook my head again, but he just kept asking and asking and asking. And at that point, I kind of knew that he wasn't going to stop asking until I did it. So I did. I said, fine, and he pulled my hand and made me touch him. It only lasted a couple of minutes, and the whole time I wanted to be somewhere else. It felt like I wasn't even fully there anymore. Eventually, I felt something wet on my hands. I immediately pulled my hand away. I had to roll up my sleeves afterwards to hide the wet spot on my sweater so that way no one would see. I was convinced that someone was going to see it, but they never did. Again, no one noticed.
I've received a lot of physical harm from him, which left left marks, like bruises, and whenever he was angry with me, that would happen. I had a relapse and began coping through ways like self-harm. I felt really worthless, and like my only use in life was to be there for people to take their anger and physical needs out on. I felt like an object.
Coping with my assault, I became numb. I actually blocked out a majority of that year. I was 16. I can't remember most of it. At the time, I went to therapy and vaguely spoke about it with my therapist. It also helped me cope when I would tell my family members what happened, as I felt I needed someone to turn to. I know in the early years to follow, I would just dissociate. I still do, and I'm 21 now. This affected the entire trajectory of who I was as a person. My trust in others started to lessen as time passed. I became more vigilant with who others truly were. I have some PTSD from it. I get triggered varying in how intense the triggers are. For example, during intimate moments with my ex-boyfriend from 2020, I got triggered and began crying from the flashbacks. I used to get highly triggered driving down the streets I drove during the incident, and being in the areas of my own home which I had old memories of with that uncle. It's just a constant mental thing of offering myself never-ending grace, patience, love, and reassurance that I am okay, and I am now far past that time in my life.
Sometime after that, we were together again, walking down the hall, and he kept reaching over to touch me. I had said no this time, but he kept trying. I pulled his hands away, but again, he just reached back over and kept trying. I pulled his hand away 3 times. I think he was trying to see how far I'd let him push me, how much I'd let him get away with. It was then I knew that I had to break up with him and leave. I thought if he kept pushing and pushing and pushing after I said no, would it keep going? Keep escalating? I was afraid of what could have happened to me. I felt so dirty and disgusting. I thought that if anyone found out what happened, they'd hate me and think I was disgusting. So I didn't tell anyone for a while. I was convinced they wouldn't want to be my friend anymore or blame me for what happened. I was afraid. I started self-harming a lot after that. I kept thinking about how I should have done something, or how I should have said no sooner. Or maybe if I just walked away in that dark room, maybe it wouldn't have happened to me. I see him a lot of the time, even now. I mean, I'm more used to it now, but right after everything happened, I'd have anxiety attacks, and it felt like I couldn't breathe when he was around. Every once in a while, those feelings come back, and I feel scared all over again.
I blamed myself constantly, thinking that I could have done something to prevent it. Why didn't I do anything? And I figured if I thought that about myself, adults and other people would think about that as well. And I would be punished for not doing enough or protecting myself and just doing enough for like preventing all of this. And I coped with my assault by self-harming and crying until I passed out or I couldn't breathe. And as time went on, I would write or role play with my friends and make my character be assaulted so I could live vicariously through them and play through how I wished my experience happened. With them being able to tell people or them being able to go on with their lives and being okay. I would write it out as if I was them, but I guess in a better situation.
The night in November will always stick with me. And trust me when I say your mind and body vividly can recall the anniversary week of the incident. No matter how long it's been or how good you're doing in life, triggers still come back to me, but they don't affect me as much as they used to. It just takes a quick moment of deep breathing or to shed some tears, and sure enough, I keep my life going with my head held high. I think we should speak up more if we see something and definitely check in on our loved ones more, as you never know who's suffering in silence.
When I finally told a trusted adult, I didn't really get the response I was expecting, I guess. They said that maybe it would have been normal in other people's relationships if I wasn't questioning my sexuality. They said if I told someone, it could affect their life and their career. I also told my therapist sometime after that, and they had to report it to the police, their mandated reporters. The police came to talk to me, and I ultimately decided not to do anything besides file a report. I didn't want to ruin his life. I'm not sure if I regret that decision or not. I think part of it is I keep telling myself that it wasn't sexual assault, that it wasn't real, that I didn't say a no majority of the time. Things happened and it was my fault it kept escalating. But I learned after a while that it was sexual assault. I didn't want it to happen, and he kept asking and coercing me until I said yes, and that's not what consent is.
I still have panic attacks or get very anxious randomly, especially around times when everything started. I couldn't really see him. I couldn't really see him around without feeling defenseless and weak, or get scared that he's going to do something. I know that other people I've been with aren't going to do the same thing, but I get very scared sometimes if they get upset or mad at me. I'm always very aware and think that they're mad when they're not, which can then cause them to get upset, and it hurts them. It's okay to take as much time as you need to heal, because everyone's healing process is different. The way people cope is different, and if it takes you a bit longer than it takes other people, that's completely okay.
What happened is not your fault, and you don't deserve what happened to you. Never let what happened to you dim your light nor stop you from doing something great with yourself. Focus on small moments that make you crack a smile or make you laugh. I'm proud of you for choosing life, and I hope that you choose to stay in the years to come, because I know how hard it can be.
It's not your fault what happened to you. The only person who could have stopped it from happening is the person who did it. You don't deserve to feel bad or worthless over what someone else chose to do, what crimes they chose to commit. You deserve to heal, and you should allow yourself the time and space to process what happened to you and heal from it. I'm proud of you for being here. I'm proud of you for surviving. We see things all the time, even as kids. We see people asking what the victims were wearing, or blaming us because we didn't get out sooner, which somehow makes it our fault. Our parents or peers push past our boundaries, our no's, so often as we grow up, whether it's something big or something small. Eventually, we begin to think that relationships are supposed to function this way, and that's just something people do. And it's our fault if it happens to us and if we're upset. We begin to think that pushing the boundaries of consent is normal, and we begin to blame ourselves for what happened to us.